We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
A decision on the new fighter aircraft for the Royal Air Force, which is being designed in cooperation with European partners, has been postponed until October. The RAF wants the go-ahead to replace its aging Phantoms. They are being increasingly outclassed in aerial combat training.
The RAF's concern about its Phantoms has been highlighted at Decimomanu in Sardinia, where Britain shares a unique electronic combat range with Italy, Germany and the United States. The Phantom is over 20 years old and has been outdated by planes like the American F-16, which have remarkable maneuverability and sophisticated radar. The latest Soviet fighters are believed to have similar performance to the new American planes. Germany, Britain and Italy are intending to build a joint replacement for their outdated aircraft. The European fighter aircraft is to be that replacement, and it's due to go into full-scale development at the end of this year. EFA, as it's called, should be able to outmaneuver any other plane flying, but it won't be coming into service until the early 1990s. The US Air Force Aggressor Squadron trains at Decimomanu with planes painted in Warsaw-Pact camouflage, equipped with radar and weapons that imitate Soviet systems. Phantoms from 56 Squadron at RAF Wattisham, practicing aerial combat against the aggressors and the highly maneuverable F-16s, have been struggling to keep their old technology competitive. Flying on the combat range, a radio pod under the plane's wing feeds data to a computer center on the ground, where every detail of the aerial battle is displayed on a screen. Ground controllers give radar assistance to their combatants.
Harry, your mate needs help. 5 miles, 250.
The controllers can switch to the view the pilots have in their cockpits.
One still heading towards you, guns. 340, range 5.
Here, an RAF Phantom pilot, nicknamed Guns, is being chased by an American aggressor using Soviet tactics. On the right of the screen, the red plane fires its missile.
Guns are dead. Snap north.
In this game of combat, the Phantom was allowed to come back to life and retaliate. But on this particular sortie at Decimomanu, both Phantoms flying had radars which went faulty. The Phantom's age makes it increasingly difficult for the RAF to cope with the potential Warsaw-Pact threat.
Well, of course it does, and that's one of the reasons why we do come down here. We're certainly not able to turn as well as some of these new agile fighters, but what we can do here is, as I said before, we can develop our tactics so that at least we can give ourselves a fighting chance.
When you see some of the aircraft that the Americans have, for example, F-16, F-15, do you feel a sense of envy to some extent?
Well, of course we do. Yes, it's true, we do. But we're looking forward to EFA in the future.
With new fighters costing £20 million apiece, the planes have to be made to last, and it's inevitable they'll lose their edge after 20 years of service. Geoffrey Archer, News at 10, Decimomanu.
President Reagan has had 2 apparently benign polyps removed from his colon in a regular checkup. After the examination, his doctor said his health was fine. The polyps will now be
for such flights. But the solution could lie in training pilots at ground level, as our aviation correspondent Chris Wayne reports.
Although modern jets can fly at very high altitudes, the general rule for military pilots in combat is the lower you fly, the longer you live. But low-flying training is hazardous. If an aircraft is at an altitude of 250 feet and a speed of 900 feet a second, a pilot in trouble doesn't have much time or room for maneuver. So there's growing interest in simulators, using computer-generated imagery. None of the aircraft in this scene is real. Each exists only in the mind of a computer. But all the aircraft are being flown by different pilots in individual simulators. In this case, it's a practice in-flight refueling.
Tango 2-1 has contact. Falcon 1, contact. Falcon, we have Cobra flight joining on our right wing.
At the moment, there is a limit to the degree of realism which can be provided, because every detail on the ground has to be created by the computer. And the more detail that has to be put in, the more expensive it becomes. This is made even harder by the need for all-round vision in cockpits and rapid changes in course and height. So now engineers are experimenting with an electronic system monitoring eyeball movements, so that the detail will be painted in wherever the pilot happens to glance. Experienced pilots say the greatest difference between flying a simulator and flying a real jet at low level is that you cannot yet successfully reproduce the buffeting caused by crosswinds in valleys. On the other hand, if you do make a mistake, the result is alarming rather than fatal.
A recent British parliamentary delegation to Russia.
General Georgy Beregovoy, the Soviet space boss, made the offer a fortnight ago when British politicians visited Moscow. He's apparently quite serious about it, pointing out that other foreigners such as the Indian Rakesh Sharma have been sent into space on Russian craft.
It doesn't really matter which way you get into space. The main thing is to determine your own objectives, and if we have a need to get there, which I believe we have, to do all sorts of experiments and explore frontiers of science, then wherever we can hitch a ride, we should take it very seriously.
The Soviet offer comes as Western space efforts are in the doldrums. The Challenger disaster grounded the shuttle program and so delayed plans for Britain's first astronaut to go up and launch a new spy satellite. Another satellite carrier, the unmanned American Titan rocket, exploded on its launch pad 3 months later, and the crisis deepened when the European rocket Ariane was blown up shortly after takeoff. On the same day, Soviet television showed live pictures of cosmonauts walking outside Salyut 7, demonstrating their current success in space. Experts hope the offer to Britain is due to comradeship, not propaganda.
I would like to think that it's a reflection of what used to be the case, that everybody in space, the Russians, the Chinese, the Americans, have that kind of fraternity within the limits imposed by politics, and they do like international cooperation. All of us do.
It's 10 years since East and West shook hands above Earth. Scientists say it should happen again to give trained British astronauts experience in space.
The blame squarely on the men at the head of NASA. The report, which was released this evening, is a damning indictment of safety standards and the way the rocket was designed. And it says there was pressure to fly the shuttle too often. The explosion happened after a leak of gas from the shuttle's booster rocket. No alarms were sounded, and the crew had no indication of a problem. The report recommends greater emphasis on safety standards, redesigning the shuttle's rocket boosters, and the use of other satellite launchers as well as the shuttle.
The report, though widely leaked in advance, was much in demand on the day. The queues to obtain it started early. Americans were looking for reassurance from a commission, including 2 astronauts, and led by a former Secretary of State, that the cause of the disaster was established beyond doubt.
We know what happened. We know it was a tragic event, and now that the report is out and everybody has a chance to look at it and study, we hope that NASA can continue on with a program which has been very successful in the past and will be in the future.
The commission was working for 4 months. It traveled the country, interrogated witnesses, inspected the evidence retrieved from the ocean floor, and photographs tracing the origin of the disaster from the first puff of smoke at the side of the solid rocket booster. The evidence was of a launch that should never have happened, a faulty design that proved fatal in the cold weather, as engineers were warning at the time.
Yeah, the big concern is nobody knows what the hell is going to happen when that thing lights off and all that ice gets shook loose.
We still are in a position, and it's a bit of a Russian roulette. You'll probably make it. 5 out of 6 times, just like you do playing Russian roulette.
It won't happen that way again. In future, astronauts themselves will have a say in a decision to launch. There'll be new safety procedures and a thoroughgoing reform of NASA, which the space agency itself in its first reaction was eager to accept.
Where management is weak, we will strengthen it. Where engineering or design or process need improving, we will improve them. Where our internal communications are poor, we will see that they get better.
It's taken as read in the White House that the shuttle won't be flying again until these changes are made. Mr. Reagan, in accepting the report, was characteristically upbeat.
This has been a difficult passage for America, but we will go on, just as the crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger would have wanted us to. We'll simply do what has to be done to make our space program safe and reliable and a renewed source of pride to our nation.
The next step is to make the design changes. Though there are those who fault the idea of the shuttle as well as the design, one space expert said it's like flying on a broomstick with a firework either side. This is Martin Bell for the 9 o'clock news in Washington.
And the failure of equipment for the accident. President Reagan said America would still push ahead with its shuttle program, but the operation this time would be safer. It could be years before another spacecraft is launched if the report's recommendations are acted upon. The shuttle report describes the disaster as an accident rooted in history because NASA officials allowed their safety program to lapse over a period of years, bowing to pressures to increase the number of launches. The disaster's blamed on a faulty joint in the right side booster rocket. The Commission says festering problems with the seal had been concealed. Officials felt it was an acceptable flight risk. The report says the boosters must be redesigned, the shuttle's most important components re-examined. It recommends independent safety checks and says emergency escape systems must be improved.
Engines throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
The Shuttle Commission was born in the aftermath of death and shattered dreams, amid an unprecedented breakdown in America's pioneering faith. Only hours before the accident, so commonplace had hurtling man to space become that it seemed a normal consequence that for this 25th launch, a teacher should go too.
And I just hope everybody tunes in on day 4 now to watch the teacher teaching from space.
The investigators were led by President Nixon's former Secretary of State. Now in his 70s, William Rogers went public with his inquiries and public in his criticism, so that when the queues formed to get hold of his report this morning, it contained few surprises. In essence, his message is simple: the solid rocket boosters must be redesigned, safety must be the watchword, but the agency that must achieve this, NASA, must itself be overhauled. The very company that builds the boosters itself is a target for criticism. Consequently, rebuilding NASA, redesigning the rockets, will take months, if not years.
If they didn't have to change anything, but they could convince themselves that they really could make the old design fly again, it would take probably till next summer to go through the certification, testing procedures, re-verification, and getting ready to go. So it certainly isn't going to be sooner than that.
We would urge NASA not to be too optimistic about the launch schedule, to do it on a realistic basis, and I think they will.
But NASA's problems have not been eased by the failure in quick succession this year of most of America's unmanned launch methods. Mr. Rogers himself, joining the President at the White House, has successfully reduced the controversies surrounding the shuttle failure. The Commission's advice is likely to be acted upon, though dissenting Nobel Prize winner Professor Feynman believes NASA should have been attacked far more forcefully. Mr. Reagan himself believes the shuttle and America's endeavor in space must now go on.
We'll simply do what has to be done to make our space program safe and reliable and a renewed source of pride to our nation.
The President's standing remains undented by the shuttle failure, though some of the pressures to launch have been attributed to his administration. Mr. Rogers proves to have been a wise choice. America has buried her astronaut dead. Mr. Rogers has explained why they died. But here, the dream cannot be entirely restored until another American flies in space. Jon Snow, News at 10, Washington.
So it's been a disastrous year for the space industry in the West. 3 United States launched disasters, and only this month Europe failed to launch its Ariane rocket. And as a result, space for the launch of the industry's latest products is at a premium. Expensive satellites are backing up on the ground waiting for the first available shuttle. But it could be a long, long wait, and time in the satellite business means a lot of money. So where can the commercial satellite companies go? Launching satellites into space was not originally the shuttle's primary role. But as the pressures on NASA grew for a commercial return, so the commitment to satellite launches increased. There were some satellite breakdowns, but as a launch vehicle, the Space Shuttle proved, in numbers at least, to be a great success. Out of a total of 25 missions involving a mixture of payloads, only one, mission number 25, ended in failure. Statistically the most successful launcher ever built, the shuttle is now grounded until the end of next year at the earliest. It's also likely that when launches restart, only military and government satellites, possibly including the British Skynet, will be carried, but no commercial ones. After the shuttle failure, all eyes turned to the earlier Delta and Titan series, but the massive commitment to the shuttle had virtually ended production of the older rockets. Things got a lot worse when the last 2 launches ended in explosions. So despite a good track record, with 380 flights and only 26 failures, all these craft are now grounded pending investigation. And even when they're cleared for blast-off, there are only a handful in stock, with none available except for military use.
Premier étage. We have liftoff.
The natural alternative for a Western launch is Ariane, built by a French-led European consortium. But Ariane, too, has been bedeviled by problems. 2 of the last 4 missions have failed. In all, 18 Arianes have been launched, and of the 4 failures, 3 stemmed from the rocket's 3rd stage, and there are fears that the current investigation may reveal a design fault. Ariane is grounded until the end of this year, with 6 of its satellite launches already delayed, and no new bookings can be made until 1989 at the earliest. So to whom can satellite operators turn? The Soviet Union has launched more satellites than the rest of the world put together, over 1,200 launches with about 120 failures. But the Soviets have never carried a Western satellite, and the US technology boycott makes them unlikely to in the foreseeable future. Japan has carried out around 25 launches of a US-designed rocket with at least 5 failures. They plan to offer commercial satellite launching facilities on a Japanese-designed rocket, but not before the 1990s. Which leaves China, who have this year made an aggressive entry into the satellite launching market. The Chinese have adapted their military ballistic missile technology for the launching of satellites and are keen to take orders from the West. Of their 20 launches so far, the Chinese say that only 2 have failed. They will launch a small Swedish payload next year, and they're taking orders for larger satellites for 1988. An American company has already made 2 bookings, and longer-term discussions are in progress with the British Science and Engineering Research Council. Well, Geoffrey Pardo, is that where one goes if one wants to launch a satellite now to China?
Well, not inevitably. I mean, I think one should say straight away that the Americans will get the shuttle back in, but as you'd said, whether or not it's going to be really directed towards commercial launches, we have to see. But Ariane is dedicated to commercial launches, and I have no doubts at all that after the delay to rectify this particular fault, Ariane, the family, is there, has been demonstrated well, and will continue. But I think what has happened as a result of the series of failures we've unfortunately had in the world is that the small number of options which we've had so far, largely the shuttle and Ariane, will widen. The pressures are on in America to bring back expendables, and we find the Chinese certainly there at the moment with a launch vehicle which has a good track record of modest size, and I think we shall see these options being taken up.
But why are the Chinese so successful in an area that perhaps one wouldn't have expected them to be so successful in when the West has seemingly failed?
Well, I think we must get it in proportion. Of the 22 have failed, of Ariane's 18, 4 have failed. But Ariane has been under commercial pressures, and the Chinese yet are not under commercial pressure. What they've done is build a very successful series of rockets, and I think they've used modest technology, except the upper stage of liquid oxygen and hydrogen is really quite advanced design. So I think the fact that they are doing about 2 a year at the moment, and the tempo is not yet one where you begin perhaps to be forced into faults, and that might be one of the problems.
Well, you've just come back from there. What's the likelihood of Britain launching a research satellite there?
Well, at this stage, really, there's a study going on to see whether one of the scientific and technological satellites, which is being looked at in the UK, might go up on one of the modest-sized Long March 2 Chinese rockets. But the Long March 3, which is a more advanced one, is certainly there, and as you've said, is being taken up by the Western world already, and the Swedes certainly intend to put Mailstar up on it. So the Chinese have got a very good performance, a very good track record, but they're not yet under the commercial pressures which we have successfully stayed with in the United States and Europe.
Well, Richard Cook, just to bring you in at this point, on the general point, what would happen if the United States, as a result of the Challenger and other failures, were to decide not to launch any other except military satellites on their program?
Well, that is what they're going to do in the short term. in the short term, they're going to have to deal with the backlog of military missions, and then they'll start getting to the scientific missions that have been postponed.
Well, to get back to the Commission's report published today and the fact that you were an expert witness involved there in that particular report, you did warn about the flaw in the system. Were you surprised that people didn't act on that warning?
Well, I suppose in retrospect, yes, but frankly, there were other problems that seemed just as serious.
Like?
Well, for instance, in the Centaur rockets, the thing that was occupying most of my attention at the time of this accident was the serious problems we were having with the Centaurs that were to be launched this summer.
Well, do you feel that the report pinpointed the cause of the accident? Do you feel it laid the blame?
Well, it didn't really go into the actual responsibility, and I think it tended to give the impression that it was the mid-level managers who were primarily at fault, but the key decisions were really made at the top of the agency, at the headquarters level.
Well, the report seems to suggest that top management were not in full possession of the facts. Do you think that's true?
They were not informed as fully as they should have been about what was happening at Kennedy Space Center the night before the launch of Challenger. But they were informed about the dangers of the O-rings and of the joints back throughout 1985. And the report does acknowledge that at a key headquarters meeting in August, there was enough information at that time for NASA headquarters to stop launches until it was fixed.
And yet the report stops short of blaming top management. Were there documents, for instance, that could have been included that might have laid the blame more precisely?
Yes, documents that the Commission had that were part of some of the hearings that for some reason or another did not make it into the final report.
So what's going on? Is somebody being protected?
Pardon me?
What's going on? Is somebody being protected?
Well, I think so. I think to a significant extent the Commission wants to get the program going again as quickly as they can, and is more or less leaving it to NASA to make the personnel changes that are needed to be made to reflect the real responsibilities that they know are there.
Do you think NASA is going to be able to act fairly effectively on the Commission's report?
Well, the difficulty is that there's a very strong tendency that we're seeing even today to essentially go back and get the Space Shuttle back into the same launch rate, the same pattern it was in before, with, of course, the improvements that have to be made for safety, but not really questioning whether the Space Shuttle itself is the appropriate vehicle to carry the burden that has to be carried.
Do you think it is?
Well, personally, I don't. I think that there are some very serious safety concerns. There are over 700 criticality 1, as they call them, things that can go wrong with the Space Shuttle. And the way that it's constructed with the solid rocket boosters burning for 2 minutes where no one can escape, an escape feature cannot be built, you still have the potential for a very serious situation.
Well, do you feel that pressure, undue pressure, was coming perhaps from the White House, political pressure, to push the program forward?
Sure. There was pressure to have a very heavy launch rate. We were 9 in 1985. We had to go to 15 this year, 24 within 3 or 4 years, and the system just broke.
Well, Dr. Parter, do you think this report has been conclusive enough, precise enough to have any impact worldwide?
Yes, I'm sure. I think it's identified without any question the nature of the problem, and I'm equally sure NASA are going to fix it. But I think that what it does point to is when you have a vehicle which is only partially recoverable, in other words, the boosters go and the tank goes, we're in the middle of a cycle which is lasting about 40 years till the end of the century, when we can get back to something that looks like an aeroplane, which, as you know, we're dealing with and studying at this time, because then you have the sort of reliability we attribute and take for granted, if I may say, to aircraft at this time. So we've got about 15 years to go to the end of the century. We have to learn to live with rockets which are expendable and partially recoverable, such as a shuttle.
But the United States space program, you think, is going to recover from this bad patch?
Oh, without any doubt at all. It's just a question of timing, and now particular attention to the safety features which certainly have emerged from this particular report.
Right, Richard Cook in Washington, Dr. Pardo here in London, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Well, tonight...
He ejected a split second before a ball of fire engulfed the aircraft. The accident happened at RAF Scampton in Lincolnshire as the Red Arrows were practicing for their next display.
Red Arrows, clear takeoff, surface wind.
The plane was one of the Red Arrow's 9 Scarlet Hawk jets which began their takeoff run at Scampton this morning. It was to be another practice session for the team of top fighter pilots, each selected for exceptional flying skill to spend a tour of duty with the Red Arrows, renowned for their spectacular displays of close formation aerobatics. But as the first group of 4 jets left the ground, something went wrong with the last one. It fell back onto the runway. The pilot fired his rocket-propelled ejector seat and blasted clear. The tanks carrying dyed diesel fuel for the Arrow's famous smoke trails exploded as the sliding jet ground them along the runway. But the pilot was clear and he survived with cuts and the usual back injuries that ejector seats bring. And the flames were short-lived. The Hawk jet, renowned for its strength, careered onto the grass and came to a halt more or less intact. It will probably fly again. Recent Red Arrows accidents have been the result of their aerobatic flying, but this one was a takeoff accident, now shown in slow motion. It's not uncommon with military jets. Probably an engine failure at the critical moment, though it's not yet been established. Unable to fly or to stop in time, the pilot's training is to save himself, and his rocket-propelled ejector seat takes him in a split second to a height at which his parachute can open, leaving the crippled plane to its own devices, still on the ground.
A 16-year-old schoolboy who went on the rampage with a shotgun at his Northamptonshire...
The plane burst into flames, but he ejected safely and suffered only minor injuries.
Says that the Soviets are so far ahead in the space race that they could use to dominate the world's economy by the next century. Mr. Alan Bond, an atomic energy expert who designed engines for Britain's revolutionary hot-oil spaceplane, says there's a Soviet master plan for the industrial exploitation of space.
May the 15th, Energia, the Soviet Union's new heavy-lift rocket, blasts off from the Tai-Yuratam test center in Central Asia. It was these pictures which gave the scientists the information they were looking for, the proof that the Russians have developed a reusable launcher rocket capable of lifting space laboratories and transporting huge amounts of cargo into space. Energia, at 200 feet high, is as tall as a 20-story building. It's 30 foot higher than the US shuttle and can lift the equivalent of several American space shuttle flights. But what puts it years ahead is the simple fact that the Soviet launcher is reusable. Scientists believe it's in the field of economics and space industrialization that the Soviet Union will have supremacy within the next 20 years. The Soviet intention of providing energy from space was, in fact, first outlined by a Russian scientist at a conference 2 years ago. These pictures of the control center at Tai-Yuratam show just how sophisticated Soviet space research has become, and their plans are ambitious. Mirrors 1 mile in diameter could be utilized to reflect sunlight and illuminate cities. Using lasers and 30-foot mirrors, a power station in the east can provide electricity to industry in the west of Russia, 3,000 miles away, in a third of a second. These schemes might seem to border on fantasy, but most British scientists believe they will happen within the next 25 years. But with the Russians still seeking concessions on America's Star Wars program, what of Energia's military capabilities?
If the Soviets were interested in putting 200-ton bombs in space, they could have easily done it much more quickly by building Saturn V type fully expendable vehicles at any cost, because they would only need a few launches. But they're building, to our knowledge, 3 launch complexes, and we estimate they'll probably need about 4 in the long term. But they are certainly embarked on the construction of 3, and the Energia vehicle is obviously optimized for economic use.
If the Soviets continue with these developments, their economic and political leverage on a global scale could be unmatched. It is that which is causing alarm amongst scientists in America.
Using older technology, Mr. Tom McLean, the man who's trying to win back his title of fastest
26-foot frame of the Space Shuttle program. For 2 minutes, the rocket's joints will be subjected to intense force, which caused them to split apart in the Challenger explosion. If all goes well, the NASA Space Agency hopes to resume its shuttle flights next year. But as our Washington correspondent Edward Sturton reports, there are doubts overshadowing what was once America's most prestigious adventure.
Solid motor ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of Columbia and the
Mission control as it's been seen so often on the occasion of an American space triumph. Now this room at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas is empty. The quiet interrupted on this day only by a contract worker discussing redecorating estimates. There are no missions to control. The mock shuttle used to train astronauts still attracts a trickle of tourists, but the earliest anyone will fly on a real shuttle mission is June next year. And as NASA seeks painfully to recover from last year's shuttle disaster, the agency has drawn the charge that it's lost the will to fly.
We don't ground a fleet of aircraft just because one of them crashed, even if it kills 100 people.
Arthur Dula, a Houston lawyer, has rubbed salt into NASA's wounds. With America grounded, he's set up a company to put American satellites on Soviet rockets. He believes NASA has overreacted to the Challenger disaster.
They studied the Challenger disaster in great detail, and with an awful lot of anguish, an awful lot of humility, really, in a way, among the technical people. They wanted to make sure it wouldn't happen again. The problem is that going into space is inherently dangerous. The rockets that we use are so powerful. For example, the rocket engines on the Shuttle Challenger use 5 times as much energy as the city of London while it's flying to space. It is impossible to make something like that totally safe.
Right now, miles above the Earth on a manned space station, experiments are being conducted that could cure major diseases.
The fear that America has lost its way in space and fallen behind the Soviets is heard everywhere, in newspapers, news programs, and even television commercials.
Shouldn't we be there too?
Soviet superiority is at its most visible in the field of long-term human presence in space. Current use of their Mir space station, the 7th successive such craft, has now given them 3 times more man-hours in space than the Americans. America hasn't had a space station since Skylab was allowed to die in 1979, and its next station won't go up until 1994. NASA argues that the Soviet superiority here is offset by American superiority in other fields. But even the agency's administrator, James Fletcher, admits he's worried.
We did the Apollo program, which was a spectacular program, and that put us way ahead of the Soviet Union. There was no doubt about it then. And then we went with the Space Shuttle, which is also a successful program, and that's when our space science began to grow. We got way ahead of them in space science, but they kept, you know, the tortoise and the hare, they kept going on their manned space program, and so now we'd have a hard time catching them, as I said, before the year 2000 or later.
The story, or something like it, has happened before. When the Soviet Union won the battle to put the first satellite into space, the Sputnik, in 1957, the United States seemed beset by failure and lost the race to put the first man into space as well. The pressure on President Kennedy became overwhelming.
Tired of seeing the United States second. What is the prospect that we will surpass Russia in this field?
However tired anybody may be, and no one is more tired than I am, it is a fact that it's going to take some time, and I think we have to recognize it.
Kennedy reacted by creating a program that soon had a $25 billion budget and inspiring the nation with the idea of going to the moon.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills.
God bless you both, and all of us here are watching with great pride.
Under President Reagan, the budget is less than $10 billion, and he is associated not with the triumphant landing on the moon, but the tragedy of the Challenger disaster.
I think that the Reagan presidency has presented a number of very serious problems for America's space program. On the one hand, the president has claimed credit for the successes of the Space Shuttle, appearing when the shuttle landed back in July of 1982. On the other hand, the White House failed to give the space agency the financial support that would have been needed to correct the problems with the shuttle that they knew about before the Challenger accident. And if that extra money had been forthcoming, perhaps the Challenger accident would have been averted.
NASA became so concerned about the loss of public support that it asked Sally Ride, the first woman in space, to write a report on restoring leadership in space. Alan Ladwick co-authored the Ride report.
Well, we lost the leadership because we didn't have a well-developed strategy and the necessary type of ongoing national commitment to give the funding to keep the leadership areas that we had.
Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle.
Behind all NASA's problems lies the memory of last January's Challenger disaster. Damage done by the explosion went well beyond the confines of NASA itself. It touched the nation as a whole. And the damage it did to America's confidence will take a long time to repair.
One of the reasons that the Challenger accident had such an impact here in the United States is that our space program has been so very closely identified with Americans' conceptions of who we are as a people. The Air and Space Museum on the Mall here in Washington is the single most visited place in the United States. It's really a cathedral to the genius of the American people. We're an airplane-building, spacefaring nation. And then to have this absolutely unprecedented catastrophe befall us, the Challenger accident, I think has really forced a reevaluation of who we think we are as a people.
This week, NASA paraded 15 newly recruited astronauts before the television cameras. Among them, a British-born physicist with dreams of going to the moon and beyond.
I would like to do all of those, be a crew member and do space station and maybe in that order go to the moon. And if Mars came up, you know, that's another one.
But everyone here knows that before those dreams become reality, NASA must recover its confidence. That means getting the shuttle flying again, and Richard Corrs, Deputy Director of the Shuttle Program, says that makes the booster test being carried out today crucial.
Getting this test off this week is a big milestone to program recovery. It will boost the morale and keep people realizing there's we used the word, a light at the end of the tunnel that we're going down.
NASA has to some extent become a victim of its own success. The almost routine character of shuttle missions before the Challenger disaster and spectacular achievements like the landing on the moon created high public expectations. Now that those expectations aren't being fulfilled, NASA is being judged by its own very tough standards. Edward Sturton, ITN, at the Johnson Space Center.
Challenger, which killed its crew of 7 and...
The Space Shuttle has always been a crowd puller, and thousands turned out for the test firing of the redesigned booster rocket. 3 earlier attempts had failed, mainly because of computer problems. But this time, the countdown went according to plan.
Fire!
The aim of the 2-minute test was to see if the strengthened joints which hold the sections of the rocket together could withstand the tremendous pressure and heat. The full results won't be known for a couple of weeks, but first indications look favourable.
Thousands of black mine workers went back to work in the gold fields last night at the end of their 3-week pay strike. The stoppage ended after their union accepted a range of fringe benefits without any improvement on the central issues of wages.
The effects of weightlessness. Now Soviet scientists are scratching their heads and wondering how to get him and their satellite back under full control. Our science correspondent, James Wilkinson, reports.
The monkey is one of several animals sent into space to help scientists learn more about weightlessness. The Vostok biological satellite contains 2 monkeys, 10 rats, and other smaller animals, including fish and ants. It's a joint mission with the Americans. The object is to provide information which may eventually help plan long manned missions to Mars. But while one monkey has remained calm, Yerosha has managed to get one arm free from its restraint and is playing with the satellite's switches. Scientists first realized something was wrong when they saw him on a monitor screen without his little helmet, which attaches wires to his head. He's also not eating very much, which scientists say could aggravate his erratic behavior. The mission should have lasted 2 weeks. Now they're considering whether to end it early. Today, the situation on board was said to be complicated.
They returned to Earth yesterday and have now been rescued from their landing capsule by Russian scientists. Yurosha, whose name means troublemaker, became just that when he managed to free a hand while in space and started fiddling with the capsule. The mission ended on schedule, but the capsule touched down in eastern Siberia in a frozen pine forest thousands of miles away from the targeted landing zone in Kazakhstan. The Soviet scientists sent Yurosha, another monkey, some rats, fish and insects into orbit on September the 29th to test their reactions to weightlessness. Yurosha was held in place by straps, but within days the scientists could see he had freed one of his arms and was causing havoc with the controls. Today the Russians announced that Yurosha and the rest of the animals had bravely withstood the hardships of their landing in the frozen forest, and that a hero's welcome awaits Yurosha in Moscow, as he's become a Soviet superstar. And that's all from Newsround today. Until the same time tomorrow, bye-bye.
Has been further threatened this week in a major row over funding. At stake is the future of Britain's spaceplane HOTOL. British Aerospace announced this week that HOTOL had passed the first stage of development with flying colours. 2 years of extensive testing in wind tunnels, computer simulations and engine firings have proved, they say, that the technology behind the revolutionary design of the spaceplane will work. They're claiming that a prototype HOTOL could be flying within 8 years. But that will depend on funding from the European Space Agency, ESA, which meets next month to decide which projects to support. And the British government made clear yesterday that it's going to be urging ESA to cut back its spending. And without British backing, HOTOL could be left by ESA to die on the vine. The Americans are known to be interested in the proven technology of HOTOL, and the designer of the British spaceplane has threatened that if HOTOL doesn't get European backing, he'll be taking his expertise abroad. It could be that HOTOL will yet turn up as an American plane.
Next month today to replace the crew of the Mir space station. The handover will both set and end the record. The leader of the two-man team currently on board Mir has been in orbit for 319 days, the world's longest space trip. And it'll be the first time there's been a complete change of crew. Our science editor Lawrence McGinty reports on the significance of today's launch.
Western commentators thought the crew for today's launch might include a doctor to check on Yuri Romanenko's health after his 319 days in space. But there wasn't. The crew, who followed the tradition of signing the cosmonaut's door, had no doctor among them. Led by Flight Commander Vladimir Titov, they were engineer Musa Marnarov and test pilot Anatoly Levchenko. Their handover in space will be the first complete exchange of crews in a space station. According to Izvestia, the Soviets attempted a previous full crew rotation 4 years ago, but the rocket blew up on the pad. The crew, led by the same Vladimir Titov, all parachuted clear. This time, all went well.
How significant is this full rotation of the crews on Mir?
Oh, it's a very significant thing because by the 5th of February, Mir is going to have been permanently occupied for a year. They've tried to rotate the crews in the past. They've done partial rotations, but this is the first time they're going to completely change over a crew.
Since the two-man crew, led by Yuri Romanenko, occupied Mir last February, they've carried out a huge range of scientific observations. The new crew will continue these, especially in a second Covant module that will be added soon to Mir. They'll also carry out a spacewalk to add new solar panels to the space station.
Is it significant that one of this crew is a test pilot?
Yes, the man who's going to go up, or who's on his way up and is going to come down with Romanenko and Alexandrov, he's a merited test pilot, and he's evaluating techniques for the operation of a space plane or a reusable shuttle, which the Soviets are developing. They need this, you see, because Soyuz is a very old spacecraft, first flew back in the late 60s.
So where does this put the Soviets vis-à-vis the Americans?
Way ahead in terms of manned spaceflight. In fact, before the shuttle flies again, their cumulative man-hours will be more than 3 times the American total.
From now on, the Soviets will have a permanent presence in space, a terrific advantage with the American shuttle still grounded.
And there we take another break. Then, as MPs begin their Christmas recess,
Romanenko landed safely today after 326 days in space, 3 months more than the previous endurance record. He's to receive the country's highest honour, the Order of Lenin, but he won't be getting much time off. Soviet scientists are eager to assess how the human body adapts to Earth's gravity after months of weightlessness.
Yuri Romanenko, on the left of the screen, was leaving Mir after nearly 11 months in space. He embraced the new crew, wished them a successful voyage, and disconnected the Soyuz transport for the 3-hour flight back to Earth and gravity. The Soviet Union parachutes its returning spacecraft onto solid ground, and despite worries about strong side winds, the Soyuz landed gently in a snowdrift in Central Asia. Romanenko was pulled straight from the hatch and into the limelight. After an immediate examination, all 3 returning cosmonauts were said to be feeling well. But Romanenko will now face extensive testing to see what's happened to his body during its protracted time in space. The first glimpses provided by Soviet television suggested he'd retained a hearty appetite as he tucked into his first real meal after months of dehydrated rations. But with his family waiting to share in his triumph, Romanenko seems sturdy enough to suggest that interplanetary travel is no longer just a dream.
Yuri Romanenko's record-breaking stay in space will help the Russians answer key questions about what happens to people in prolonged weightlessness. There are 3 main problems cosmonauts face on long space flights. First, there are the psychological pressures. Feelings of homesickness are not uncommon. Cosmonauts lose fluid from their bloodstream. After landing on Earth, this gives them low blood pressure and they feel faint. There may also be changes in the blood itself, making them more prone to infection. Perhaps most serious of all, their bones lose calcium. Because their muscles are not pulling on the bones don't need to be so strong. So calcium leaks out. To get round the psychological problems, cosmonauts carry tapes of earthly sounds with them, like birdsong, and they have regular talks with their family. To help overcome the loss of blood volume, they drink a lot of fluid before returning to Earth. And in an effort to prevent their bones losing too much calcium, astronauts take exercise regularly, as here in Skylab. This keeps their muscles and bones in good shape. The exercise helps, but no one is too sure whether the bones can fully recover from the loss of calcium. The Russians have said their long-term aim is to send men to the planet Mars, a 3-year mission. The Russians are confident they can overcome the problems of weightlessness eventually. Other schemes involve a spinning spacecraft making its own gravity to take men to the surface of Mars, though this would be extremely expensive. Some Americans are skeptical. They believe there's more important space research to be done on the moon before a manned mission to Mars can be considered.
The Ethiopian government has accused Britain of withholding millions of pounds of development aid because of objections to the Marxist regime there.
Spent a record 326 days aboard the Soviet space station Mir, testing man's ability to survive in weightless conditions. Space experts say the mission was in preparation for a possible manned expedition to Mars early next century. Caroline Kerr reports.
The Russian Soyuz capsule descended by parachute into the middle of a Soviet blizzard. It reappeared from behind the clouds on the snowy steppes of Kazakhstan, surrounded by helicopters, as its crew were being prepared for an unusually well-publicized arrival. The man who'd broken the world record for space endurance, Yuri Romanenko, had to be helped out of the capsule, but he emerged looking fit and well, and most of all, delighted to have returned to Earth. He told reporters that his colleague, Alexander Alexandrov, just couldn't get used to the idea of going home, and had carried on working right up to the last minute. After nearly a year in conditions of weightlessness, Romanenko was expected to be quite weak and was carried off for a medical checkup. But Soviet doctors said they were amazed that the whole team were able to sit up by themselves, have a cup of tea and tuck into a good meal almost immediately. Romanenko then received his second hero's welcome of the day, this time from his wife, who he hadn't seen for over 11 months. The main purpose of this mission had always been to see how long cosmonauts could endure conditions in space.
Eventually they plan to send men to Mars, probably not this century but early next. When you go to Mars, you've got to wait first of all for Mars to get in the right place to go to it. And then when you get there, the Earth isn't in the right place to come back, so you've got to stay and wait. So my guess is it could be a 3-year mission.
Earlier today, Romanenko handed over control to a new team. The Russians are now hoping they'll stay even longer.
And it's just been announced that the Americans have had to cancel their planned launch of the Space Shuttle next June. The delay has been caused by the failure of rocket booster tests.
The shuttle program has been delayed. All flights have been grounded since the Challenger disaster nearly 2 years ago, and now tests on a new rocket booster have ended in failure, so plans for a shuttle liftoff next June have been postponed. And finally, the Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Romanenko will have extensive medical checks today to see how he's been affected by almost 11 months in space. He landed safely after his record-breaking mission, and although carried away on a stretcher, he told colleagues that he was feeling great. And that's all from Washington. Now back to Jeff Mead in...
Next June's relaunch of the Space Shuttle program has been postponed after a fault was found during tests on its redesigned booster rockets. The shuttle program has been grounded for 2 years since the Challenger explosion, but NASA's chief of spaceflight has predicted that the takeoff will be delayed only by several weeks. Our science editor Lawrence McGinty examines what went wrong with the test firing and whether NASA's optimism about a quick recovery is well-founded.
4, 3, 2, 1, fire.
The second of 4 crucial tests on the shuttle's booster engines last week seemed at first sight to have been a success. Almost 2 years after the explosion that ripped apart the shuttle Challenger, the can-do philosophy seemed to have re-exerted itself. But officials now admit the test had gone wrong.
120.
After studying the booster, they found that a ring, a sort of insulation ring called an outer boot ring, which is part of a flexible component that allows the nozzle to rotate and gimbal so it steers the solid rocket booster. They found that part of that ring had fallen away. Now that could have occurred during the firing, but on the other hand it could have occurred after, when the solid rocket booster was doused with water to cool it down.
For 2 minutes after launch, the shuttle steers by swiveling the nozzles at the bottom of its 2 booster rockets. So those nozzles have to be movable. The shuttle is lifted into space by the 2 boosters. The Challenger explosion was caused by a faulty joint between sections in one booster. Last week's test failure was in the tail of a booster, where the rigid casing is connected to the movable nozzles. That connection has to be flexible, so the nozzles can move to steer the shuttle. What happened is that a large part of that flexible connection failed. Unlike the failure that caused the Challenger disaster 2 years ago, last week's fault would not have led to an explosion, according to rocket engineers working for Morton Thiokol, the company that builds the shuttle's booster rockets. However, it will have a significant but not disastrous effect on the shuttle program.
Until we know precisely, it's difficult to know whether it's fundamental or whether it's just something which has failed and must be altered but wouldn't actually have caused a danger at the time. One way or another, anything that breaks off at the back end of a high-performance rocket like that has got to be looked at very seriously.
Given the political environment that the shuttle engineers are now working in, how serious a problem do you think it is?
It's serious because even if it is a relatively minor problem, although I did notice that the American engineers in charge were saying it looks as if it's a design change. Even if it were fairly minor, then the routine must be rigorous indeed. So I think one's talking of a significant amount of effort and a significant delay of probably many months.
To add to the gloom, Morton Thiokol had another disaster yesterday. An explosion at the plant in Utah, where it makes MX missiles, killed 5 workers. It's the 4th major accident in 4 years for the company that builds the shuttle's boosters. The shuttle itself will in future launch only military and scientific satellites, and if the delay after last week's test failure is more than a few weeks, those missions will be threatened.
You know, if we're going to postpone from June, even if we postpone it just 3 months, that takes us into September, maybe October, and nobody in their right mind is going to launch just 1 or 2 months before the election. So that really puts us out of business for 1988, and that's just really devastating for the space program.
The Soviet space program, on the other hand, couldn't be healthier. They don't have a space shuttle, but they do have 2 men on the Mir space station who could stay there for a long time, longer even than Yuri Romanenko, who yesterday ended his record-breaking 326 days in space. Not since the days of Sputnik have the Americans been so frozen out of the space race.
Lawrence McGinty. And there we take a break. Still to come, more of the day's news.
The space programme is in trouble tonight. The shuttle spacecraft, which hasn't been launched since the Challenger disaster 2 years ago, has been grounded indefinitely. Scientists are looking for the cause of a fault in a booster rocket, which exploded during a test firing to prepare for a flight that was scheduled for June. It's all the more galling for America on a day when the Soviet Union ostentatiously celebrated the return of one of their cosmonauts after a record-breaking spaceflight, and the Chinese announced plans for a shuttle program.
2 years ago, the shuttle was like a space bus.
We have ignition, we have liftoff. Liftoff of
The missions came and went, their principal problems being only in the deployment of their satellites. The program was going smoothly, so when the 7 Challenger astronauts went to the pad in January 1986, their success was taken for granted. What happened then needs no repeating. The dream went up, only the debris returned. From that point on, the faults and failings of the space agency were laid out, and the unheeded warnings from Alan MacDonald, then a Morton Thiokol engineer.
I made the direct statement that if anything happened to this launch, told him I sure wouldn't want to be the person that had to stand in front of a board of inquiry.
In the 23 months since the disaster, the shuttle has been tested and retested. Everything from the wheels to the booster rockets, especially the booster rockets. The critical test was 2 days before Christmas. At the time, the same Alan MacDonald, now a vice president of the company, pronounced it a success and the best Christmas present they could have had. But late yesterday, the space agency announced that another component had failed, part of a ring that attaches the booster to the rest of the spacecraft. How serious a setback this is, even the experts don't yet know.
Well, if they have to go back to the drawing board and totally redesign the rocket nozzle, we could be in for a major delay. On the other hand, my suspicion is that the problem relates to the way that particular nozzle was actually fabricated, in which case they can go back, review the manufacturing process, and probably get flying with a 3 to 6 month delay.
And Morton Thiokol, the company that makes the booster rockets, suffered yet another disaster also in Utah yesterday when fire broke out in one of the buildings where it assembles the MX missile. 5 of its workers were killed. The MX program, the shuttle program, and the company involved in both are in deep trouble. This is Martin Bell for the 9 o'clock news in Washington.
Western scientists are worried that the Soviet Union has now established a significant lead in the space race. Our science correspondent James Wilkinson reports on the continuing contest between East and West.
Since the moon landings, the bid for dominance in space has become a race between the tortoise and the hare. America, the hare. After the Apollo programs, the public and political appetite for space was lost. There was no obvious goal. Then came the shuttle. It was designed to lower the cost of satellite launches. But many experts had warned NASA that abandoning ordinary rockets in favor of the shuttle was a mistake. Now NASA is paying the price. There are scores of grounded satellites waiting to be launched. Its space science program is in the doldrums, with unmanned missions to Venus and Jupiter now again delayed. America's space station is vastly over budget, and the morale of its scientists and engineers has been badly hit. Meanwhile, Russia is basking in the success of its latest hero, Yuri Romanenko. Less than a day after his return from space, he was walking in the park, physically sound after his 11 months of weightlessness. His adventure bringing closer the day when a Russian walks on Mars. Russia's Mir space station has become the world's first permanently manned space station. And this year, Russia has launched a huge new rocket, Energia, which can carry more payload into orbit than 4 shuttles combined. America is still at the stage of planning a similar rocket for its own space station and for launching SDI hardware. The Americans will overcome their current problems, but it will take leadership and commitment, which many feel is lacking.